since you first took the oath at sunrise.
I paid my due bill. Constantine Horvath is not going to accept the appointment.
Hollywood legend Glenn Ford died alone in his mansion, broke and forgotten. The man who made $12 million and dated Marilyn Monroe spent his final years barely able to walk after suffering stroke after stroke. His ex-wives took everything. His son barely visited. And the secret diaries found after his death revealed a shocking truth nobody knew. From movie star to isolated old man, this is the heartbreaking story Hollywood doesn't want you to know. Glenn Ford was born on May 1, 1916, in Quebec City, Canada. His real name was Gwilyn Samuel Newton Ford, and he came from a family with deep roots in Canadian history. His father worked as a railroad executive, and his great-uncle was Sir John A. Macdonald, the first Prime Minister of Canada. That heritage gave Glenn a quiet strength, something that would later become part of his on-screen charm. Even after he became a big Hollywood star, people could still see a trace of that calm, reserved nature that came from his northern upbringing. When Glenn was 7, his family moved to Santa Monica, California. That's where his life started to change. He went to high school there, and it was in those classrooms and school plays that he found his love for acting. He wasn't flashy. People described him as shy, even a bit awkward. But there was something about him, something genuine. After graduation, he didn't waste time. He jumped straight into theater work, performing with small groups across California and even taking a shot at Broadway. He was determined, quietly working his way toward a dream that hadn't fully taken shape yet. These early years built the foundation for a career that would span 50 years and over 100 films. But acting wasn't the only thing Glenn was serious about. His father had made a deal with him. He could chase his dream of acting, but only if he learned real-world skills first. Glenn took that advice seriously. He learned how to build houses, fix plumbing, wire electricity, skills that most Hollywood stars wouldn't even think about. Even at the peak of his fame, he'd be fixing the air conditioning at home or hammering together a roof. He wasn't doing it for show. He was genuinely good at it. He could have made a living as a builder if acting hadn't worked out. That practical side of him was rare in Hollywood, and it kept him grounded when others lost their way. Still, the road to stardom wasn't smooth. In 1939, Glenn got his first major film role in Heaven with a Barbed Wire Fence. But what should have been a proud moment turned into something awful. The director, Ricardo Cortez, humiliated him on set, tearing into his performance in front of everyone. He called Glenn a mistake, said he never should have been cast. That moment crushed him. It was public, brutal, and unforgettable. Most actors would have walked away. Glenn didn't. He held on to that pain, but he pushed forward, proving Cortez wrong with every role that came after. That early humiliation didn't break him. It hardened him. Later that same year, something big happened. Glenn was spotted by talent scout Tom Moore and signed to a 7-year deal with Columbia Pictures. That was a big deal because Columbia usually didn't keep actors under contract. But Glenn had something they wanted, even if his name didn't fit the Hollywood mold. Gwilyn Ford wouldn't fly, according to studio boss Harry Cohn. So he became Glenn Ford, a name inspired by his father's hometown, Glenford. The studio had done this before. They turned Margarita Cancino into Rita Hayworth and Harriet Lake into Ann Sothern. Glenn didn't fight it. He understood the game. Around that time, he was also paired with another fresh face, William Holden. When Glenn Ford and William Holden signed with Columbia Pictures in 1939, studio boss Harry Cohn had one thing in mind: chaos. He wanted two ambitious young actors locked in a bitter rivalry. He thought that if they fought over every role, he'd have more control. But the plan exploded in his face. Instead of turning into enemies, Ford and Holden became best friends. They shared stories, jokes, and even audition tricks, like stuffing paper in their shoes to look taller. Their bond would last for over 4 decades, right up until Holden's death in 1981. They were supposed to compete, but they ended up growing together, side by side, as 2 of Columbia's brightest stars. Ford didn't start with blockbuster hits. He slogged through Columbia's endless stream of B-movies, the kind of low-budget flicks made to fill out double features. After a small role at Fox, Ford made his Columbia debut in My Son is Guilty. Then came forgettable titles like Convicted Woman, Men Without Souls, and The Sensational Babies for Sale. In that one, Ford played a reporter trying to expose an illegal baby-selling ring. It was gritty, loud, and meant to shock. These weren't glamorous roles, but they taught him everything: timing, presence, pacing. He didn't get applause in those early days. He got practice. And while he was learning the craft, Ford was also making headlines behind the scenes. On the set of The Lady in Question, he fell into a passionate affair with Rita Hayworth. Their chemistry was electric, but Ford didn't stop there. He was also involved with Evelyn Keyes at the same time. Studio head Harry Cohn tried to shut it all down, even going as far as bugging their dressing rooms. It didn't work. Technicians loyal to Ford tipped them off, and the affairs continued in secret. Years later, Ford's own son would reveal that his father kept detailed records of over 146 lovers, including many of his co-stars. He even started secretly recording his own phone calls, becoming the very kind of man he once had to outwit. As his off-screen life stayed dramatic, his on-screen roles started to shine. In Texas, Ford finally found a breakout role, ironically alongside Holden. Then came The Desperados, Columbia's first Technicolor film. It was a big deal, especially for a studio once considered second-rate. Ford played a quick-drawing outlaw who barely missed a bank robbery. It was loud, colorful, and full of action. Even though Randolph Scott got top billing, critics and fans knew who stole the show. Ford's performance, full of charm and grit, showed he was ready for bigger things. But just when everything seemed to be falling into place, Ford walked away. Not because he had to, but because he chose to serve. Even with a deferment, he joined the Coast Guard Auxiliary, then the Marines after Pearl Harbor. He didn't get any shortcuts. He trained, served, and eventually worked in the Marines' film department. There, he helped produce training films and public service pieces. He even teamed up with Tyrone Power for a wartime radio show. After serving in the Navy for almost 3 years and suffering from painful stomach ulcers, Glenn Ford was finally discharged on December 7, 1944, exactly 3 years after Pearl Harbor. Even though he didn't see direct combat, he was honored with several service medals. But Ford didn't leave the military entirely. He stayed in the Naval Reserve well into the Vietnam era, eventually earning the rank of captain. When he returned to Hollywood, though, he was just another forgotten actor trying to restart his career. That changed the moment Bette Davis chose him to star alongside her in A Stolen Life. Davis played twin sisters fighting over the same man, Ford's character. Audiences noticed, critics praised his charm, and suddenly Ford wasn't doing low-budget films anymore. Then came the role that truly made him a star, Gilda. Playing opposite Rita Hayworth, Ford brought a quiet intensity that electrified the screen. Their chemistry was more than just acting. The two were in the middle of a real-life affair that would continue on and off for decades. Every glance, every tense scene between them felt raw and real. Gilda didn't just boost his career. It carved out his image as a man who could hold his ground beside even the most powerful stars. Ford wasn't loud or flashy. He didn't need to be. His strength was in what he didn't say. Unlike most leading men of the time, Ford avoided grand performances. He believed in subtlety. Just a look or a pause could say more than a long monologue. This quiet confidence became his trademark and earned him the nickname King of Cool. Critics were sometimes unsure of his approach, but the audience loved it. His characters felt real. They weren't untouchable heroes. They were men you could believe in. That honesty made him one of the most bankable stars from the 1940s through the 1960s. His cool, restrained style reached a new level in The Big Heat, where he played a detective whose wife is killed in a car bombing meant for him. Ford didn't go over the top. He let the pain simmer under the surface, making his revenge feel even more personal. He wasn't a superhero. He was a man pushed too far. One of the most unforgettable moments came when he teamed up with a disfigured woman, played by Gloria Graham, to bring down the criminals responsible. Their scenes together were powerful and tense, especially because both characters had nothing left to lose. It was one of Ford's rawest performances, and one of his best. Then came Blackboard Jungle. Ford played a war vet turned schoolteacher facing a class full of violent teenagers. But it wasn't just the story that made headlines, it was the music. Ford's son, a rock and roll fan, introduced him to a Bill Haley record. That same record ended up in the film's opening credits. The moment Rock Around the Clock played, a new era began. Teenagers went wild. They danced in the aisles. The song topped charts. And just like that, Ford was part of the moment that launched rock music into the mainstream. Behind the scenes, senators debated it, cities banned the film, and theaters braced for chaos. Ford, once again, found himself in the middle of a cultural storm. In 3:10 to Yuma, Ford flipped the script on what a Western villain could be. He played Ben Wade, an outlaw with charm and depth, not just another bad guy with a gun. You could almost root for him. It was rare in those days to see a Western character so layered, and Ford pulled it off effortlessly. He wasn't trying to outshine anyone. He just made his characters feel real, even when they were dangerous. Ford didn't stop there. He made more than 24 Westerns over his career, building a reputation that rivaled even John Wayne's. But where Wayne went big, Ford kept it quiet. His heroes weren't always sure of themselves. They doubted, hesitated, made mistakes, and that's what made them believable. He once joked that he liked cutting lines from his scripts instead of adding more. That was the key to his style. Say less, mean more. His dedication to Westerns went beyond acting. Ford did many of his own stunts. He had learned to ride from real cowboys, and it showed. He got hurt, badly, more than once. A crash during a land rush scene broke ribs and tore his back. Another time, he nearly got trampled trying to save a crew member during a stampede, but he never backed away. For Ford, it wasn't about looking like a cowboy. It was about being one. In The Fastest Gun Alive, Ford played a quiet shopkeeper with a hidden past as a deadly gunfighter. It wasn't just about the shooting. It was about what it meant to carry that kind of burden. Ford's character didn't want fame, but trouble always found him. His performance balanced skill with fear, pride with guilt. And when he finally showed just how fast he could draw, the town and the audience held its breath. Then came The Sheep Man, a Western with a twist. Ford played a sheep farmer who strolls into cattle country and immediately stirs up trouble. It could have been just another dusty standoff story, but Ford gave it charm and humor. He made audiences laugh without losing the grit of a Western. His chemistry with Shirley MacLaine added romance, while his scenes with a young Leslie Nielsen brought the tension. The film wasn't just a hit. It was proof that Ford could carry any kind of Western, serious, or funny. Glenn Ford always played the good guy on screen, the reliable everyman, the trustworthy friend, the quiet hero. But behind closed doors, he was living a double life so detailed and secretive that no one, not his friends, not his wives, not even his lovers, ever saw it coming. When Ford died in 2006, his son Peter discovered a collection of diaries. But these weren't ordinary journals. They were obsessive, day-by-day records of every romantic encounter Glenn ever had, going all the way back to 1945 when he was filming Gilda. That's when his affair with co-star Rita Hayworth began, and from that moment, he started keeping track of every conquest, every detail, every name, every location. Over 4 decades, Ford filled these journals with encounters involving 146 women, nearly all of them actresses, many of them famous. He wasn't just jotting names, he was documenting full scenes. What happened, where it happened, how he felt, and even how he rated them. The most shocking? A one-night stand with Marilyn Monroe, which supposedly happened right on the couch in his Beverly Hills home. That same couch was later auctioned by Peter. But the longest and most intense relationship? That one stayed tangled with Rita Hayworth, running on and off for 40 years. At one point, he even bought the house next to hers and built a private gate between the two, just to sneak in and out without anyone noticing. That's how committed he was, to her and to the secrecy. The obsession didn't stop with pen and paper. Around 1946, he installed a hidden recording system in his home, not to spy on outsiders, but to track his own wife, Eleanor Powell. He was terrified she might discover his cheating. Over time, this habit turned into something darker. He started recording phone calls, including conversations between him and his own son. One reel, found after Glenn's death, was labeled Peter's Conversations. His paranoia had become so intense that he recorded everything and told no one. Friends who'd known him for decades, lovers who'd shared years with him, they all had no clue. And when the tapes and diaries finally surfaced, it sent shockwaves through Hollywood. No one imagined the quiet actor had been documenting them the entire time. The deeper Peter dug, the more bizarre the discoveries became. Stripper and cult actress Liz Renee once ranked Ford as one of her top 5 lovers. That detail, already logged in Glenn's journals, likely with a rating to match. According to Peter, the diaries were so precise that he could tell not just when and where Glenn met a woman, but what they did and how Glenn felt afterward. It was like a private museum of memories, obsessively curated and locked away from the world. But Glenn Ford's life wasn't all bedrooms and secrets. His other obsession was service, military service. Unlike many celebrities who posed for pictures with troops, Ford went deep. Way beyond World War II, he did 2 tours in Vietnam between 1966 and 1968, walking through combat zones, scouting film locations, and joining Marine teams in active war zones. At age 50, while other actors were attending parties, Ford was crouching in muddy trenches. He even participated in 5 classified missions, something he never explained, except to say, "They asked me to go, and I went." He was awarded the Navy Commendation Medal, not for show, but for being there when bullets flew. And then came one of the strangest twists of all. In 1952, while filming in Europe, Ford went out drinking one night in France. The next morning, he woke up as a new recruit in the French Foreign Legion. Yes, really. He had somehow managed to enlist while drunk. It took 4 frantic days of negotiation to get him out. The producer of the film finally convinced the Legion that keeping Ford would halt production and put over 100 locals out of work. Only then did they let him go. But that wasn't the end of his military adventures. Ford became the only Hollywood actor to serve with both the French Foreign Legion and America's elite Green Berets. During his Vietnam service, he embedded with Special Forces, willingly walking into danger despite being a global star. For all of this, he didn't just receive applause, he received medals, dozens of them, from the U.S. Navy, from France, even from Vietnam. In 1992, he was awarded France's Légion d'honneur, nearly 50 years after his wartime service. His shelf of military honors looked more like that of a general than an actor. Glenn Ford's life off-screen was filled with as much drama, heartbreak, and intensity as anything he ever acted out in front of the camera. At first, it all looked like a fairy tale. In 1944, he married Eleanor Powell, one of MGM's brightest stars, in a quiet ceremony filled with flowers and warmth. Eleanor, just 33 at the time, shocked everyone by giving up her entire career to become a full-time wife and mother. She left the spotlight behind for Glenn and gave birth to their son, Peter, the next year. But things began to fall apart when Glenn returned from World War II and starred opposite Rita Hayworth in Gilda. That movie didn't just boost his career, it lit a match in his personal life. Eleanor was deeply religious and loyal, but Glenn couldn't stop himself from chasing other women. She put up with it for years, quietly enduring the pain for the sake of their son. But when Peter turned 14, old enough to choose who he wanted to live with, Eleanor finally had enough. Their 17-year marriage ended in 1959, and Eleanor was left with barely anything. She had to rebuild her life and career from scratch in Las Vegas, where fans welcomed her back with open arms. Behind the scenes, Glenn had been carrying on an affair with Rita Hayworth that lasted nearly 40 years. They met in 1940 during the filming of The Lady in Question, and sparks flew immediately, even though Glenn was also involved with another co-star at the same time. When Gilda came around in 1946, their chemistry was so intense that Columbia Pictures' head actually bugged their dressing rooms to keep tabs on them. It didn't work. They were tipped off by the sound crew. Their relationship burned hot, especially during The Loves of Carmen in 1948, when Rita got pregnant. She quietly disappeared to Europe and came back with nothing more said. In 1960, Glenn even bought a house next to hers and had a secret gate installed so they could see each other whenever they wanted. But they never married. One of them was always tied to someone else. Their bond lasted until Rita began losing her memory in the early 80s, when Alzheimer's started to take her away piece by piece. After his divorce from Eleanor, Glenn tried marrying 3 more times. None of them worked. His second wife, actress Catherine Hayes, left after 3 years. Glenn didn't handle it well. His son later said the alimony and emotional toll nearly crushed him. In 1977, he tried again with a younger woman, Cynthia Hayward, but she walked out after 7 years, leaving him buried in more legal costs. The final blow came in 1993, when at 77 years old, he married Jeanne Baus. That marriage lasted less than a year. His son believed these women were only after his money, draining him financially and emotionally until he was left with barely anything. None of his ex-wives stayed in touch, and even Peter grew distant over time. There was a darker, more vengeful side to Glenn Ford that few saw. When he was just starting out, director Ricardo Cortez humiliated him on set, calling him a terrible actor in front of the entire crew. Glenn was so hurt, he nearly quit acting altogether. Years later, now a Hollywood star, Glenn ran into Cortez at a high-end restaurant. He lost it. He had to be physically restrained from attacking the man who once crushed his spirit. That grudge never faded. Glenn held on to pain like it was part of him, and he treated broken relationships, whether with ex-wives or his own son, with the same cold distance. He could be charming, sure, but he never really forgave. In the 1970s, Glenn made a bold move and transitioned to television. His debut in The Brotherhood of the Bell was unexpected and risky. The film was about secret societies and corruption, and it aired during a time when Americans were losing trust in institutions. Glenn played a professor who turns against a secret brotherhood and tries to expose them, only to be labeled insane. Surprisingly, Glenn loved making that film. He called it the most enjoyable job he ever had, and it struck a nerve with viewers who were starting to question everything around them. That TV success opened new doors. CBS offered him his own series, and after some back and forth, he ended up playing a tough sheriff in Cades County. It only lasted one season, but it had a big impact. Guest stars like William Shatner and Martin Sheen appeared, and Glenn showed he could still carry a show. He followed it up with The Family Holvac, where he played a preacher struggling to keep his church and family together during the Great Depression. These roles weren't as glamorous as his movie days, but they were grounded, heartfelt, and showed a different side of Glenn. Then came Superman in 1978. Glenn didn't have much screen time, but what little he did had a lasting impact. As Jonathan Kent, the man who raised the world's most powerful hero, Glenn brought a quiet strength and warmth to the role. His death scene from a sudden heart attack left a mark on audiences and shaped Superman's moral core. It was a small part in a massive film, but it introduced Glenn to a new generation who'd never seen his earlier work in noir or westerns. The film went on to become a classic, and years later, it was preserved by the Library of Congress. Glenn Ford didn't live the kind of Hollywood life you hear about every day. He didn't waste his money on wild parties or gamble it all away. Instead, he quietly built a fortune over 5 decades, nearly $12 million by the time he passed, which would be about $18 million today. His journey started back in 1939 with a modest role in Heaven with a barbed wire fence, but by 1958, he had become Hollywood's #1 box office draw. Ford worked with giants like Columbia and MGM, always staying consistent rather than chasing blockbusters. Off-screen, he made smart real estate moves, including buying a huge 22-room mansion in Beverly Hills in 1946. Even in the later stages of his career, TV roles in shows like Cades County and Once an Eagle kept the checks rolling in. Glenn Ford wasn't just a famous actor, he was a smart one. But no matter how sharp his financial sense was, time eventually caught up with him. Around 1991, Ford began to step away from the spotlight. He suffered a series of small strokes, and while his body weakened, his mind remained clear. By the early 2000s, he spent most of his days at home in Beverly Hills, watching old movies and writing back to fans. On his 90th birthday in 2006, a tribute was planned at the Egyptian Theater in Hollywood, but he was too unwell to attend. Just 4 months later, he had trouble breathing. Paramedics tried to save him, but it was too late. Glenn Ford died at 3:47 p.m. on August 30th, 2006. The funeral brought together some of the biggest names in Hollywood. Martin Scorsese even sent a heartfelt tribute. Ford was buried in Santa Monica, next to his parents, dressed in his French Foreign Legion uniform as he had requested. It was a quiet, dignified end to a long and layered life. His acting legacy still holds up today. Glenn Ford starred in more than 100 films and over 50 TV productions. What set him apart wasn't flashy dialogue or big gestures. It was how little he had to do to say so much. A single glance, a twitch of his mouth, could carry an entire scene. He made you believe in his characters, whether he was playing a hard-edged cop in The Big Heat, a conflicted teacher in Blackboard Jungle, or a gunman in 3:10 to Yuma. While others stuck to one genre, Ford moved between noir, westerns, dramas, and comedies like it was nothing. Younger actors like Steve McQueen and Clint Eastwood studied him. Directors like Scorsese and Tarantino praised him. He didn't just act. He showed people a new way to be on screen.